My dad heartlessly kicked me out of the house so my golden child half-brother could move in and enjoy the life I was pushed out of. 6 months later, karma hit hard. Now they're desperately begging me to lie and cover up a serious crime he committed, because if I don't, they're both facing jail time. Funny how quickly the unwanted son becomes their last hope. I turned 18 about 4 months ago. My father had already forced me out of the house 6 months prior, all because my half-brother, Derek, who is 24, decided he was moving back home. He didn't want to find his own place, like most people, and opted to live with my dad. Instead, Derek is my father's son from an earlier relationship, but his mother and my dad separated shortly after his birth, so they didn't really maintain much of a bond. Derek was always much closer to my father than to his own mother, so we ended up spending a lot of time together growing up. He would visit far more frequently than his custody agreement required. I'm fairly certain he was only meant to spend half the month with my dad, but I remember him being around almost constantly. Perhaps my mind is just exaggerating things because I truly disliked his presence. Yet my dad always insisted we interact. I also know for a fact that he didn't care for me much and saw me as a rival. My mother passed away a couple of years ago after a long battle with lung cancer, and that's when my relationship with my dad really began to deteriorate. Don't get me wrong, things had been rough between us since I was a child. I suppose my father never really wanted a son like me, or perhaps he never wanted children at all. Whatever the reason, he treated me strangely when I was little, and it often felt like he preferred me not to be around. Most of the time, he would be angry with me, shouting about the most trivial matters. He never showed me any affection, and even when I tried to earn his approval, I was met with nothing but coldness. With Derek, however, he was a completely different person. Whenever Derek was at our house, my dad would suddenly transform into the ideal father, doing everything I wished he would do with me. He would even compel Derek and me to spend time together, despite both of us making it abundantly clear we didn't enjoy each other's company. Derek resented me because he saw me as a threat, and I disliked him because he consistently bullied me as a child. He always tried to instigate conflict and push me around, simply because he could. He knew he'd face no consequences, as my father would never rebuke him. When I complained to my dad about Derek's rough behavior, he'd tell me to just tolerate it, claiming that's how boys were supposed to interact, and that he didn't want me to become weak. I assumed that's what my father expected from me, so eventually, I learned to endure it. I never retaliated, fearing my dad's anger, and I knew fighting with Derek was a guaranteed way to provoke his yelling. It didn't even matter if Derek was causing problems. If I fought with him, I was always deemed the wrong one. My dad never cared about the details. Whatever happened, I was the villain. It was quite obvious he had a favorite, and it certainly wasn't me. Not for a moment did he consider it strange that Derek was picking on me, even though I was a full 6 years his junior. Then, gradually, Derek's bullying tactics evolved. Physical aggression wasn't enough for him as he grew older. Once he started high school, he began tormenting me with his friends. Before that, school had been my sanctuary because I was in elementary school while he was in middle school, and we had separate buildings, so he couldn't reach me there. But once I entered middle school, we shared the same building, and he and his friends would gang up on me, constantly ridiculing me. They even spread ridiculous, nasty rumors about me, like claiming I was mentally challenged, and all the older students knew me as Derek's idiotic younger brother. I'm not exaggerating. That's precisely what they called me. They would even hurl insults, which made things incredibly difficult because when kids enter middle school, they become more concerned about their reputation. So, even the friends I had from elementary school stopped speaking to me because I wasn't considered cool enough to associate with anyone. It wasn't until Derek graduated that I finally had the school to myself and could exist in peace. I did manage to make a couple of friends, but most people simply believed the rumors, and I just let them get away with it. I was so worn out from constantly fighting that I couldn't even bring myself to argue with people. At home, things were just as bad as ever. as Derek and my father never missed an opportunity to belittle me and make me feel foolish. The ironic part was that I wasn't even foolish. I had pretty good grades and excelled in science and similar subjects. But my dad and Derek didn't care about that. Derek was a football player, and to top it off, he was actually a pretty good student too. So, you can imagine how dreadful things must have been for me at home. Derek was everything I wasn't. Athletic, academically strong, and exactly the type of son my father desired. On the other hand, there was me, who was average in every sense of the word. They never missed an opportunity to remind me of just how insignificant and ordinary I was. My mother tried to defend me most of the time, but my dad was quite persuasive and would convince my mother that they were just joking around with me and didn't mean anything they said. My mother was generally a kind and gentle person, but she was also truly in love with my father, so she never saw him for what he really was. She would try her best to stand up for me, and I appreciated her efforts, but it wasn't effective because it wasn't enough. My father, along with Derek, continued to torment me for as long as they could. Then, finally, Derek left for college, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. My dad would still be around, but he was significantly less irritating to deal with when that other jerk wasn't with him. But before I could discover what it was like to live with my parents without Derek constantly bothering me, my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was incredibly difficult for us to accept, as it felt like our world had shattered. The only thing my father and I had in common was our deep love for my mother, so her diagnosis truly broke us both. But instead of strengthening our family, my dad chose to make the situation worse. My mother was already suffering, but now, instead of my father and I putting on a brave face for her, he started distancing himself from her even more. Previously, he would at least speak to me, even if it was just to make subtle digs. But after my mom's diagnosis, he stopped doing even that and began to act as if I didn't exist at all. I can cut him some slack for that, as both of us were suffering, and he simply chose to cope with the pain in a different way. I would have preferred if my mom's struggle brought us closer somehow, but clearly that wasn't destined to happen. Even if it was meant to be, my dad was the kind of person who would ensure it didn't occur, because for some reason, he just disliked me and couldn't bear the thought of me being happy. Over time, my mom's condition only worsened, and my dad's temper also began to take a toll on me. He would either ignore me completely or be absolutely nasty, and there were several occasions where he nearly made me cry because of his rudeness. I tried my best to maintain peace in the family by not reacting to my father, because I knew it would just give him more reasons to criticize and pick on me. During the years my mother was sick, whenever Derek returned home from college, he would ease up on me, and I appreciated that. He wouldn't be kind, but he would at least act like a normal human being, and that was more than I could ask for. Things were difficult when my mother was still alive, but after she passed away, I went from one bad situation to an even worse one. For the first few months after my mother's death, the house was remarkably quiet, and by that, I mean I did all the work while my dad was unresponsive. He would function, go to work, come back, and have dinner, but nothing more. I was somewhat concerned for him, and contacted my grandparents multiple times to express my belief that my father was probably depressed, but they didn't take me seriously. Either they didn't care enough about their son to check on him after the funeral, or they simply disliked me, just like my father, and didn't want to follow my suggestions. But after a few months had passed, my father started returning to his normal self. Unfortunately, that also included excessive drinking and making me feel terrible about myself yet again. He would constantly order me to do things around the house, and it was truly exhausting because not only was I attending school, but I was also handling all the chores around the house that my mother used to do, even when she was ill. My dad and I managed to get all the work done when she was sick, but after her passing, all that responsibility fell to me. I couldn't even object, because if I did, my father would tell me that I wasn't contributing financially, so this was the least I could do to live there. It was deeply insulting, but I had nowhere else to go, so I just had to accept it and cope. For the longest time, The only thing I looked forward to was going to college, because that would mean I would finally be free of my father, and I wouldn't have to come back home anyway. I didn't even consider this place home anymore, because once my mom was gone, it stopped feeling like home to me. I could have moved out and started living with my mom's parents after her passing, but they live very far away, and I still had a year of school left, so that wasn't an option for me. But then, a couple of months ago, when my father discovered that his favorite son would be returning home, he kicked me out anyway, and I ended up moving in with my grandparents. Derek had moved out for college a couple of years ago, but hadn't returned to live here since. After he graduated, he found a job there and decided to stay because his girlfriend wanted to remain there and build a life for themselves away from home. So, Derek chose to stay there with her and would only come back for holidays occasionally. About 2 years ago, he married his girlfriend because she was pregnant. They had just graduated when they found out, and it seemed like perfect timing. So they decided to get married. I was invited to the wedding, surprisingly, and just for that one day, he didn't torment me. My mother was also present despite her condition, because even though he didn't care for it, everyone else liked my mom, and he wasn't particularly close to his own mother, as she was somewhat neglectful. I say this because she was the kind of mother who simply didn't care about her child or having a relationship with them. The woman was already on her 4th marriage by the time Derek got married, and it honestly seemed to me that her goal in life was to accumulate wealth. She worked and earned her own money, no doubt, but that came at the expense of her relationship with her son. I suppose that explains why Derek was so attached to our father. He pretty much only had one parent who cared about him, and of course, he didn't want to share that parent with me. Anyway, Derek got married and soon after had a child. They had been living happily there for the past 2 years, but for some reason, 6 months ago, they decided to move back. My dad just informed me about it about 2 weeks before Derek was supposed to come home. He was quite smug about it he sat me down one day and told me that I needed to find a place to live because Derek would be coming back home, and I had to vacate my room. We had 3 bedrooms, so I asked him why they couldn't just use the guest room. He told me that Derek and his wife were going to live in the guest room, and they were going to use my room as the nursery. It was apparently essential that I leave the house because I was already old enough, as I would be an adult in just a few months. I thought it was truly unnecessary and selfish of my father to demand that I leave the house entirely, just because he wanted to move back here with his family. I tried to argue with my father, but there was no reasoning with him because he had already made up his mind. He told me that I had 2 weeks to clear out, and after that, if I didn't leave, he would call the police on me. Now, I'm aware that there must have been some legal way to fight this and prevent it from happening, but at the time, it didn't occur to me, and I was really panic-stricken because I didn't trust my father, and I knew that he was fully capable of kicking me out without notice. So, I started rushing to find a place for myself, and eventually I decided on moving in with my grandparents. I had avoided doing that so far because they lived so far away, and I still had to go to school. But at the time, I just didn't have any other options, and there were only a couple of weeks of high school left at that point anyway, so I was willing to take that risk. Within days, I had moved out, because I didn't want to be there when Derek returned home with his wife and child. My father didn't seem to care when I left, and didn't even say goodbye to me on the day I had packed up and was leaving with the movers. My grandparents had driven all the way to pick me up in their truck, and they were ready to confront my father, but I told them not to, because it simply wasn't worth the drama. 6 months have passed since that day, and I have been living with my grandparents. I haven't been in touch with my father since he kicked me out, and I didn't plan on getting back in touch with him either. I was supposed to start college in a couple of weeks, and that was already arranged. I literally had no incentive to speak to my dad or Derek ever again, but unfortunately, they were the ones who had to contact me because something had happened, and they now needed my help. They visited me a couple of days ago, and I was quite surprised because I hadn't expected them to reach out to me at any point. But my grandparents still let them in, and I decided to have a conversation with them, because they seemed quite desperate. I discovered that the reason Derek had returned here with his family was because he had lost his job earlier and was struggling to afford rent, so he made the difficult decision to come back here. His wife was fine with it because she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and didn't want to work until their child was a little older, so this was their best option. When they came back, they expected to find work easily, but that wasn't the case, because practically none of the companies around were hiring at that moment, and people with Derek's skill set were extremely common, so it wasn't as if he was a standout candidate either, but somehow my father managed to secure him a job at the company he works for. Neither of them was happy about it because it paid a little less than what Derek used to earn before, but that was all they had, so they had to make the best of their situation. But as it turns out, Derek had been taking money from the company for a couple of months now, and it had finally come to light a few weeks ago. Now my father and Derek are both in trouble because their employers believe they were colluding and are threatening to file a lawsuit against them if they don't return the money soon enough. The only reason they haven't been sued yet is because it's a family business, and the CEO of the company used to be a great friend of my mom's. It's only out of respect for her that he hasn't filed a lawsuit against them yet for embezzlement, but he's not going to hold out much longer. My father and Derek wanted me to help them. They wanted me to claim that they needed the money for my college fund, which is why they had been taking it, and that it wasn't for their own personal gain. My father believed that this would make the CEO take it easy on us and buy them some time to return the money. They would still lose their jobs, but at least they wouldn't end up in prison because of this. They were counting on me to help them out and paint the perfect picture of being a poor little victim. I couldn't believe they had the audacity to ask something like this of me after the way they had treated me my entire life. I said no almost instantly without even considering it, because it was a crazy idea, and I was pretty sure it wasn't going to work. Their plan was simply ridiculous, and I didn't want to be a part of it. When I told them that I didn't want to be a part of their scheme, they started getting really agitated and told me that I had to help them out because there was a very real chance that they might end up going to jail, and I couldn't let some petty grudge from years ago ruin their lives. So I told them that it wasn't a petty grudge, and it certainly wasn't from years ago. My father had only recently kicked me out, and it hadn't even been a year since then, so I would say that it was pretty recent. But that wasn't even the main reason that I didn't want to help them. I just thought that their plan was really dishonest, and I actually happened to know the man my dad worked for. As I said, my mother and he were really good friends, and he also seemed to like me. He and my mother had pretty much grown up together, and I used to refer to him as my uncle whenever he would visit when my mom was still alive. Even at her funeral, we had a nice conversation, and we got along. My mom was actually the one who had told him to offer my father a job in his company when my dad had been struggling, but instead of being grateful, not only had Derek decided to try and make a fool out of these people, but my dad was now trying to cover it all up and use me as a shield. I thought that it was really despicable, and I couldn't, in good conscience, be a part of this. So I told them that it would be in their best interest if they just tried to pay off whatever amount they had taken instead of trying to cover it up with more lies and deception, because I wasn't going to be on their side here, and they might end up going to jail if they tried to fool him again. In fact, they should even be grateful that they were being given a chance to repay that money and get out of this without a lawsuit that they would most definitely lose, and that would ruin their future because they would definitely go to jail for it. They had no idea just how easy things were for them right now, and exactly how complicated they could become if they decided to go through with their crazy plan. I tried to explain it to them, but my dad got really angry and said that he wasn't there to listen to a lecture from me, and if I wanted to help them, then I would agree to their plan instead of giving them advice that meant absolutely nothing. So, I told him that I wasn't going to be a part of this, and to my surprise, my dad actually started crying. I had never seen this happen before, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. He told me that he had been counting on me because I was his son, after all, and no matter what had happened in the past, he knew that he would have helped me out if I was in a situation like this. He said that he expected the same of me because this was a huge deal, and he really didn't want to go to prison. Derek also had the same sentiment, and he was begging me to help them out because he knew that I was well liked among my mom's friends, and I was the only one who could bail them out. My mom would have made this much easier, but since she was gone, I was the next best person to deal with it, and they were banking on me. It was difficult, but I still had to turn them down, and I tried to encourage them to just come clean and repay the money that they owed. They got really upset and said that the only reason I was screwing them over was because they used to bother me when I was little, and they were really disappointed with how I was handling things now. They left after that, but I keep thinking about it, and the guilt is eating away at me because I keep imagining them in jail, and I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. But at the same time, I don't want to be a part of something illegal and so immoral. It would be an insult to my mother as well, because I would technically be using her friendship and manipulating a really good friend of hers. I'm really conflicted right now about what I should do. And time is of the essence at the moment, because it's not like my dad and Derek have forever to pay off their debts. So was I wrong for not wanting to lie and cover up for my dad and my half-brother who bullied me my entire life? Update 1. I've made a decision, and I think I'm going to stick to not helping them out. Not only is it unethical and immoral, it's simply illegal, and I don't want to be involved in something like this. So, if my dad and Derek want to stay out of jail, then they will just have to sort this one out for themselves. It's not even like they are in some grave danger. They have been given the opportunity to set things straight, repay all the money that Derek took, and get out of this without damaging their reputation. They can choose to return all the money and fix this for themselves, so I have no reason to feel guilty. Most of the comments here suggested that I stay out of this, not just because my father and Derek were terrible people, but also because what they were doing was truly wrong, and I wouldn't be able to live with it on my conscience and move on like they would be able to. It's clear that we are not made of the same stuff, and I would not want to do something like this, so that's why I have chosen to stay out of it. If they contact me after this, I will block them. For the record, they are already blocked everywhere, but I'm sure that they might use some different numbers or social media accounts to reach me. My grandparents also think that I'm doing the right thing by staying out of this because this is a mess that they created, so now they have to clean it up. It doesn't make sense to expect anything of me after the way they treated me for so long. Update 2. Hi. So my father reached out to me today through text, just as I had expected. It's been 8 days since he visited me last, and we haven't spoken since then. As I had said, he used a different number that I wouldn't recognize to call me, and I absent-mindedly answered the call as well. The second that I picked up the call, I hung up when I heard my father's voice on the other end. But I was a little too slow in blocking him, so he was able to text me, and I received the message as well. He messaged me saying that he knew that I didn't want to discuss this any further, but he and Derek were in huge trouble and really needed me to help him out because their employer was pressuring them and threatening them every single day to return the money, or else he would file a lawsuit against them. It made me feel very guilty, but I texted him back and told him that I wouldn't be helping him, and he really should start looking for other ways to return the money instead of avoiding the problem. Then I blocked him. And I hope that he understands where I'm coming from. Even if he doesn't understand it, I just hope that he does the right thing. I would hate to have a father in prison. Update 3. Hey. So I haven't heard back from my father yet, but my grandparents told me that they had got in touch with my mom's friend, the CEO, to ask him what he was planning to do. We haven't contacted him before because he's a busy man, and we didn't want to bother him unnecessarily, but we needed to know what was going on, and speaking to my father or Derek was no longer an option. So, my grandpa spoke to him, and he told us that he was still planning on filing a lawsuit if he didn't receive the money back in a couple of months. He told us that he was willing to let it all go because of his friendship with my mother, but he couldn't forgive the debt, and honestly, I respected that. He was being far more lenient than most people would have been in a situation like this. He even apologized to me and told me that he was sorry that this was happening to me. But I told him that it was no big deal since I don't even live with my father anymore. And he kind of deserves this. So we don't know what is going to happen, but I think my dad is clever enough to know that he should really pay the amount back somehow so he doesn't end up in jail. It's going to take a while, but I'm sure that they'll do it, and I have nothing to worry about. I also had a long chat with my mom's friend, and he told me that my mother had spoken to him before she passed away and said that if I ever wanted to intern somewhere for some quick cash, or maybe if I just wanted a job in general, his door would always be open. So that's nice to know, and I'll keep that in mind going forward. Even after she's gone, my mom is still looking out for me, and it really makes me happy.